The Pope needed a fortune. He didn't pray. He called Jakob Fugger. Picture Renaissance Europe, marble cathedrals reaching toward heaven, Michelangelo's brush bringing prophets to life, gold leaf glinting in the candlelight of 1,000 masses. But beneath the incense and the artistry, there was another currency at work: debt. And one man controlled it all. His name was Jakob Fugger, the richest man who ever lived, the banker who financed emperors, funded the church, and underwrote the very civilization we called the Renaissance. He didn't conquer with armies. He didn't rule from a throne. He did something far more dangerous. He made the powerful need him. This is the story of the first capitalist empire, built not on land, but on ledgers. For centuries, power meant land, castles, armies, bloodlines stretching back to Charlemagne. But by the 15th century, Europe's kings had discovered something intoxicating: credit. They could wage wars without waiting for harvests, build palaces without emptying treasuries, expand empires on borrowed time. But someone had to lend that time. Someone had to keep the books. Enter the merchants, the bankers, the new aristocracy of coin. And at the center of this financial revolution stood the Fuggers of Augsburg, a family of weavers turned financiers. Jakob Fugger was the youngest son, the spare heir, the one nobody expected to matter. He became the axis on which Europe turned. While other bankers lent cautiously, Fugger understood something radical. Credit wasn't just money, it was control. Lend to a king and you own his wars. Lend to the church and you own salvation itself. The sword could take a city, but debt could take a continent. And Fugger was about to take it all. His genius wasn't mystical, it was methodical. Fugger looked at Europe and saw inefficiency. Monarchs controlled mines but lacked capital to extract the silver. The church collected tithes but couldn't finance expansion. Merchants moved goods but had no way to move information. So he built the infrastructure of power. First, the mines. Fugger secured monopolies on silver and copper across the Tyrol and Hungary. Not by force, by contract. He financed the operations, took the output, and controlled the flow of precious metal across the continent. Artists painted angels, Fugger financed the paint. Kings minted coins, Fugger owned the silver. Then the network. He established the first pan-European banking system. Offices in Lisbon, Rome, Antwerp, Krakow. Private couriers faster than any royal messenger. Information became currency. When a shipment arrived in Venice, Fugger knew before the Doge. And then the masterstroke. He lent to the Habsburgs. Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, was perpetually broke. Armies cost money, glory cost more. Fugger became his creditor, his financier, his indispensable shadow. When Maximilian needed troops, Fugger provided funds. When Maximilian needed legitimacy, Fugger bought it. Kings ruled by decree, Fugger ruled by signature. But his greatest gamble was still to come. 1519, the Holy Roman Emperor is dead. The most powerful throne in Christendom sits empty. 7 electors will choose the next emperor. The candidates, Francis I of France and Charles V of Spain. Francis had an army. Charles had Jakob Fugger. The election wasn't decided by blood or birthright. It was decided by bribery. Cold, systematic, magnificent bribery. Fugger orchestrated the greatest political transaction in history. He secured loans totaling 850,000 florins, enough to buy cardinals, princes, and votes. For 850,000 florins, Europe's crown changed hands, and Fugger held the receipt. Charles V became Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful man in Europe, and he owed it all to a banker from Augsburg. Fugger didn't just lend money, he lent destiny. But here's what makes Fugger different from every financier before or since. He knew his value. When Charles hesitated to repay, Fugger wrote him a letter. No threats, no diplomacy, just cold arithmetic. It is well known that your majesty could not have acquired the Roman crown without my help. Power bows to many things, but it kneels to debt. Fugger's empire ran on precision. Double-entry bookkeeping, centuries before it became standard. Encrypted correspondence, diversified investments across mining, trade, real estate, and sovereign debt. He operated like a modern hedge fund in an era when most merchants still counted on their fingers. He was the first man to understand leverage at scale. Not just financial leverage, political leverage, cultural leverage. When the church needed to raise funds, Fugger didn't just lend, he partnered. He financed the sale of indulgences, the very scheme that promised heaven for a price. And that decision changed everything. Because in 1517, a monk named Martin Luther nailed his theses to a church door. His target? The corruption of indulgences, the commodification of grace, the exact system Fugger had industrialized. He financed Michelangelo's world and Luther's rebellion against it. By the time Jakob Fugger died in 1525, his fortune was worth roughly 2% of Europe's entire GDP. In today's terms, that's over $400 billion. Richer than Rockefeller, richer than Musk, richer than anyone. But wealth like that leaves scars. Fugger's system concentrated power in ways Europe had never seen. Monarchs were becoming prisoners of their creditors. The church became a transaction engine. The line between spiritual and financial collapsed. And when the Reformation exploded, it wasn't just about theology. It was about resentment. Resentment of a world where salvation had a price tag, and one man held the ledger. The Renaissance gave us beauty, but it also gave us something else, the modern economy. The idea that everything, faith, power, art, empire, could be bought, sold, and financed. Fugger didn't invent capitalism, but he perfected it. Here's the lesson Jakob Fugger leaves us. Not a moral, a mirror. He proved that money could buy power. Absolute, unshakable power. He showed that credit was the ultimate weapon, that information was leverage, that kings were just customers with crowns. But he also proved something else, that power without restraint devours itself, that systems built on debt eventually collapse under their own weight, that every empire, no matter how gilded, carries the seeds of its own rebellion. Fugger's world gave us Michelangelo and Luther, cathedrals and revolutions, beauty and chaos. Every empire since, from Rome to Wall Street, still plays his game. The names change, the instruments evolve, but the strategy remains. Control the credit, own the ledger, and when kings come calling, make sure they remember. You don't just lend them money, you lend them their throne.